Hello and welcome to Crux Investor. We're caught up with Ali Haji. He's the CEO of TSXV listed Ion Energy. They are chasing lithium brine in Mongolia. They've raised some money since we spoke to them back in March. We talk about what the use of proceeds is going to be. Drill program starting, looking for 21 holes over the next 7 to 8 months, at the end of which they've got a big decision to make. Do they bring in a strategic partner? And if so, who? They've also got $11 million worth of warrants over the next 3 years, which could come in, which could be handy. Now, if you want to hear our thoughts and opinions on the conversation, the company itself, their plans, you can find that at cruxinvestor.com. And if you want to see precisely what we talked about today, do take a look in the description below. Ali, how are you doing, sir?
Very well. Glad to be back.
Yeah, I spoke to you in March. You've been busy, I noticed. Thought we'd take the chance to speak to you, get a little update. So how have you been? Where are you, first of all? Look like you're in the office.
In Toronto. Obviously, we're in the midst of a continuous lockdown. Ontario's been a bit slow to the ball game. As you can tell, my hair is pretty wild, if you will.
Looks good to me. To a man like me, Ali, it looks great.
Appreciate that. So in Toronto, at head office here, ready to get things going. We're about to open up. Vaccines are flowing, and work is starting on the ground. So a lot of exciting things to share with the group.
Perfect. Okay. Well, look, why don't you kick off that 1 minute overview as usual, and I'll pick it up from there.
Of course. So Ion Energy, for those of you that are joining us for the first time, is focused on exploring the lithium salars in Mongolia. We currently hold about 110,000 hectares of highly prospective lithium brine licenses in the country. The largest land exploration license ever granted in country, Babayul, is our flagship. We have since commenced exploration on those assets, and they are highly prospective with grades in and around the max grade of 811 ppm. So a really formidable sort of grade to have in a vicinity that is extremely close to the largest market in the world.
Yeah, look, we caught up, I say, back in March. I think I'm going to refer people back to the link for that conversation. We talked about business plan, strategy, team, history, etc. So, people, please look in the link below for that one. Today, I want to talk about a couple of press releases. You've raised some money.
We have. So the last time we spoke, we had been off of the back of our RTO, where we raised $2.7 million at 30 cents a unit. Since then, we were sort of forced to restructure, not restructure, but essentially determine how we would best fare through the pandemic, given the locality that we operate in. Mongolia was under lockdown. And so we used that time during a sort of bull run in the lithium market to look at potential financing for our organization and the company. We announced a $3 million bought deal in March. We then had demand for about $10 million in 8 hours, so really rapidly. And of course, as a company, you don't want to dilute or over dilute your shareholders. And so we opted to take 5 million. We upsized to 5 million. We took in the over allotment option, as you do, as a result of having to pay lawyers and auditors in the junior mining space. But the focus for that $5 million keeps us fully funded for the next 2 years. We also have an upside to bring in an additional $11 million on the back of the warrants that have been issued over the course of the last 2 financings. So there is no financing overhang for the company. We're planning on doubling down on our exploration efforts. So we'll have twice as many people on the ground, essentially performing exploration as we continue to progress.
Okay, Ali, with this money, obviously, I like the fact that you've not taken everything that was on offer, but the warrants, tell me more about the timing on the warrants. So you need to remind me about that.
They're valid for 3 years on the last deal, so they were issued at 70 cents a piece. If you were to look at the Black-Scholes model, they would have been in the money for quite some time, and we've now come to recover and are trading at about the unit price that we issued the units at to begin with. So 70 cents over 3 years. We expect them to start to convert as we start to put out news flow, and that's obviously dependent on exploration, which we have since commenced as of last weekend.
Okay, well, maybe we get on to that. So talk to me about this. You just started. What are you going to be doing?
On the back of the exploration that we've just commenced, we'd start to do about 21 holes across our 2 licenses. Obviously, 110,000 hectares for junior miner is a significant land package. We have to be quite calculated with respect to where the drill goes down. And that calculative approach was determined by the microseismic program that we completed earlier this year, along with the geophysics. So we have our specific targets, and as of 2 weeks ago, we put out a press release to market indicating where exactly we would put the drills down into the ground, and that's our focus for the next 2 years.
Right, but okay. What happens if the warrants don't come good? What are the options there?
So if the warrants were not to convert, we're not too concerned about that fact. On the 5 point somewhat that we raised and were able to put into the coffers, the treasury is quite healthy at this state. We have enough run rate for the next 2 years. We will not exceed that. The warrants converting would ultimately allow us to, triple down or quadruple down on our efforts on the ground, but also look at additional acquisition targets in country. So we have no need for those warrants to convert, if you will, but we would be very happy if they were to.
Right, and obviously this is the first drilling on lithium salars in Mongolia. Have you experienced any issues? Have there any been concerns? I mean,
yes, you're absolutely right. This is first mover as far as lithium salars are concerned. So it's the first time Mongolia has ever been drilled for lithium salars. Thankfully, the salar drilling sort of model is very similar to that of oil and gas, and Mongolia has a thriving oil and gas industry. And so the expertise is quite prominent in country, and we're not facing any issues per se.
Right, because we've seen a lot of unrest, various places around the world. We've had so many companies on here talking about issues with locals and their concerns over damaging the environment, etc. We've seen a lot of that in Canada and South America. So it's you're saying they're encouraged by what you're doing. They are getting involved. I mean, how would you describe it?
It's sort of a combination of the two. I think, when you're moving away from fossil fuels, for anybody that's been out to Mongolia, Ulaanbaatar is one of the most polluted capital cities on the planet. It sits within a bowl, essentially, that's a valley. And because of their thermal coal power stations, the soot in the air during the wintertime, you can actually taste it in your teeth. You feel the grit in your teeth. And so they see, I know it's quite unpleasant, but they are moving towards a greener, cleaner future, much like the rest of the world. And so they see, along with us and our management team, a foray into cleaner, greener energy. And the way to provide that is through battery technology. And so it's quite supported. The government's been extremely supportive of everything we're doing in country for ION, as well as some of the other initiatives that my chairman has had over the course of the last 12 years in country. And we've seen nothing but support on that end. From a local community perspective, ESG is a bigger and bigger topic as we progress through the next decade or so, and we've found that the local environment for us, you have to get approval not only from the federal government but from the provincial government and then the municipal government. And the municipalities are so supportive of what we're doing because as a group, we've always employed local Mongolians, trained them to be part of the team, and therefore bring up the skilled labor sort of segment in country. And so they continue to approve our exploration efforts, and not only approve, but also look to join us as an organization as we move forward.
So what are you making, sorry to get geopolitical on you here, but we've seen comments from Biden which are sort of pushing back on Chinese. We've seen before that we saw trade wars with Trump's last few months in government. How are you seeing this Canadian company with an asset in Mongolia tapping into the Chinese market, which is obviously not insignificant? And they've really embraced this sort of EV thematic. I mean, how do you play that? What are the relationships that you've got, and what are the relationships you need to build to actually move this thing forward?
Geopolitics is a big factor in everything everyone does around the world. For us, we see ourselves as a Mongolian company listed on the Canadian Stock Exchange. Our staff on the ground are 100% Mongolian. We execute with Mongolian staff. We pay Mongolian taxes. We have an incorporation in country that manages all in-country relationships. And on the back of that, we continue to explore for lithium. And we recognize that, yes, China has some geopolitical issues with the Western world today. And the Biden administration has made it quite clear in the last little while with respect to sanctions and the rest of that stuff. But we see ourselves as sort of servicing what we like to think of as a continental supply chain. We've seen over the course of the last 3-4 years that North America with Thacker Pass in Nevada and a number of other projects that are deemed unconventional start to come online. In Europe, the European Battery Metals Alliance has now looked at Serbia and Portugal for hard rock assets because they want that continental supply chain. And in a very, very similar fashion, in the Asian market, China today imports the vast majority of their lithium from Australia and the Lithium Triangle. So not only are we servicing that local sort of supply chain, but in terms of the overall impact on greenhouse gas emissions, for instance, having shipped those products from one end of the world to the other, I think we're servicing that continental supply chain that will be required. Now, China may look to do things a little more aggressively, but that's for them to decide. But ultimately, allowing them to get something from their nearest neighbor as opposed to from across the world, I think hopefully bodes well for the international geopolitical environment.
No, it makes sense, and that's why I'm inquiring. We spoke previously about what it is that you've got there, and like I say, I will refer people back to the previous conversation because I think together it'll make a much more interesting sort of research document for them. But you're going to have to almost pick a side, aren't you? Because you can't say I'm going to supply into continental Europe or the US and be that close to one of the largest consumers in the world. How would the West view you if you were sort of talking to them about supplying into Europe, and how would the Chinese view you for doing that? I mean, it's a real interesting mix geopolitically how you position yourselves, because you can't be all things to all men.
Of course. I will tell you that the European Battery Metals Alliance and primarily Germany charging or leading the way in that regard has a fantastic relationship with the Mongolian Republic or country, and their government works hand in hand with them to help advance multiple projects. They've also shown interest as far as battery metals. The U.S. during the last administration sent their Secretary of State over to help forge a trade deal for these battery metals. And so, Mongolia sits in a very strategic location, given it's bordered by Russia and China. The Western world has an interest to ensure that those resources end up in sort of a usable manner or a friendly manner, if you will. But let's not forget that Korea, Japan, and Taiwan are all producing a number of batteries. Beyond that, the Indian government is about 10 years behind the Chinese technology machine, if you will. So they're trying to play catch up. So China might be, at this point in time, the largest consumer of lithium on the planet. They might produce the vast majority of batteries that are consumed today, and they might refine the majority of lithium that's used in batteries worldwide. But the number of countries in that region are playing catch up, and they're playing catch up pretty quickly. So it might not be the Chinese, sort of entities that we end up supplying to. It's a natural fit given our proximity. But Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and India are all racing ahead, ready to consume additional lithium.
Okay, well, let's go back to the project. Thanks for that. I think it's interesting how companies need to think about these things really early on, position themselves accordingly, because one misstep, etc. Back on the project, it's just over $5 million, right? How much of that is actually going in the ground? How much drilling are you going to be doing in dollar terms and meter terms?
Sure. In total, about 21 holes are being drilled, anywhere between 20 and 70 meters in depth across two licenses. So the Urgakhnaren and the Bavayul. The early work that was conducted on those projects tells us that the aquifers are about 20 to 25 meters below surface. So not very deep relative to what you might find in the lithium triangle. This drilling will include a number of different holes to allow us to determine the average grade of the brine that's sitting beneath the surface. Once we have the average grade of this brine as a result of doing the microseismic that we've already completed, it's essentially a volume times average grade calculation that gives you an early resource indication. So this work will be done over the course of the summer. We've also deployed a diamond core rig to Bavayul that will then move on to Urgakhnaren, our second license. That gives us a sense of the stratigraphy. And it's important to understand that so we know exactly what those layers are beneath the surface. The drilling commenced as of last weekend, so we'll start to see results come in due course. And the general sort of time frame to get results from drill to assay to market is about 3 to 6 weeks.
Wow. Okay. Explain that to me. How do you do it so quickly?
So we do it quickly as a result of the labs in country. ALS is one lab provider that's in country. SRS is also there. We have Khan Labs, which is an independent local lab as well. We're only about 4 to 6 hours from the capital, which is where the labs are located. So we'll start to drill, obtain our core samples for the stratigraphy and send them over to the labs in the capital. They will then process in about 3 weeks thereafter. So they're not really backlogged as far as we know for now. That may change as we've seen in the global environment, but we're encouraged with the early results that we've been hearing about.
Right. So what sort of grade are we aiming for here? What sort of range should we be looking at?
You look at the lithium triangle, and if you were to speak with some of the industry experts, including some that are on our advisory board, they will tell you that 250 ppm today in brine can be profitable. And as a result of that, we've seen, our lowest grade was about 411 ppm. Our max grade was 811 ppm. So we have of max grade very close to surface that we're quite encouraged by. As we start to go deeper, we expect that grade to increase.
Right, and then you've got things like impurities and trying to understand exactly what you can extract and what the economics are, and that's a long way down the path. But so just with the money that you've got available to you with 21 holes, what are you hoping at the end of that to be able to say to the market?
We're hoping to say that we have an early resource indication for something that's quite significant, given the Indo-Herrick Basin that we operate in is about 81,000 hectares. So when you look at the size of that basin, relative to what you might find in the Lithium Triangle, you might have a number of companies sharing that one basin, including Albemarle, SQM, and some of the other smaller junior miners. In our case, we control that entire basin. So having control of that entire basin and understanding that the Indo-Herrick nature of that basin traverses the entire basin as a whole, tells us that beneath that, we're bound to find something that might be world scale, if you will. And this drilling will allow us to prove that.
Right. So, okay. So that is a lot. It will require a lot of money. But to my point is, I'm trying to understand the extent and reach, or how do you show that scale? You mean, do you just do large step outs and just repeat what you found on the previous hole? I mean, is it as simple as that?
Spot on. So we have two targets that we identified, LI11 and LI8, and that's where we're focusing our drilling exercises. They're about 70 kilometers apart on Babayo. We start with 400 meters apart in a grid fashion. We then move it closer in to about 200 meters apart, thereby really getting to the depth in the center of that aquifer in terms of thickness. So it is quite a focused approach. It's being led and developed by Don Haynes, one of our technical advisors that sits on our board. He's worked on projects around the world, and he helped develop and design our exploration program that is currently underway. Okay,
fine. And right, you're able to come back to market after the drill program is finished. Do that, you're going to need to raise more capital again. Do you step it up? I mean, because you got to work out where you fit in the market. And we talked about it last time, in terms of timing the market, hitting the market right. And we understand the demand side of the story, but likewise, you've got a few steps to go through, so you kind of know where you fit in, and you're going to have to obviously bring strategic partners in and offtakes, and however you want to structure that thing. But where do you go after these 21 holes get done in terms of capital?
So after the drill program, over the course of the next 8 months or so, the intention is that we bring in a strategic investor. The strategic investor would be the likes of, it could be Tesla, it could be Ganfeng, it could be CATL, it could be Tianqi. Who's to say at this point?
But it's going to be too early for those guys, isn't it? You're going to need to do a lot of work in terms of understanding the recoveries and so forth, the impurities and so forth. You're not going to have done that with this batch of money and this batch of drilling, are you?
We will have indeed, and I'll tell you why. We've already determined what the impurities are today on the back of the 2 holes that were drilled for us to go out and acquire this license. As we continue to do the assaying, we will get a better sense of the impurities, of the magnesium, the calcium, the sodium, and the potassium ratios. We understand today that one of our holes has a rather low sort of impurity ratio to lithium. The other one is not so great, but it's still within the means of the refiners around the world today. So this early resource indication that we would obtain on the back of this drilling would ultimately, non-4311 compliant or non-JORC compliant, say this is how much lithium we have in the ground based on the drilling that we've done. Now, these strategic investors that are coming in at earlier stages of projects today because they want to ensure that they have that supply chain in the future are coming on board as strategic advisors or investors, and that's the only way we would take them on. And I say that quite prominently, and we would do that so that we would give up 10% of our equity in the company today at a higher valuation. But more importantly, it's not so much an injection of capital, because as I mentioned, as we start to produce results, we'll have access to about $11 million in warrants. But this injection of capital will be strategic in the sense that it provides us with the intellectual capital to better understand our projects, our initiatives, and thus the projection to taking them to production. At which point we would provide that strategic with a ROFR for a full-on acquisition or a majority stake in the organization, or ultimately have them come in with an additional strategic in the future to help take these assets to production.
Okay, you better get on with it then. Get some drilling done and come back and tell us all about it.
Indeed. I mean, if we weren't facing the pandemic, which we are around the world today, we would have had this work done in and around this time. But our shareholders that have been with us since the start are quite understanding of this. They know that as management and insiders, we hold 25% of the company as well. So our skin is in the game. We're waiting this out purely like the rest of our shareholders. We're not too focused on what's happening in the market in terms of liquidity and share price, because we know we're executing. We know we're doing what we said we'd do, and we continue to be transparent with our shareholders.
Okay, Ali, I'm great to catch up, and it was a quick one, but I just wanted to catch you before you went off on that Joel program. Let us know how you get on, okay?
Absolutely. Thank you, Matt.